Welcome to CMO Confidential, the podcast that takes you inside the drama, decisions, and choices that go with being the head of marketing. Hosted by five-time CMO Mike Linton.
Welcome, marketers, advertisers, and those who love them to Chief Marketing Officer Confidential. CMO Confidential is a program that takes you inside the drama, the decisions, and the politics that go with being the head of marketing at any company in what is one of the most scrutinized jobs in the executive suite. I'm Mike Linton, the former Chief Marketing Officer of Best Buy, eBay, Farmers Insurance, and Ancestry.com, here today with my guest, Seth Matlin. Today's topic: is the CMO position the hardest job in business? Now, Seth, we've known each other for a long time. He's a champion of marketing, and his career includes stints as the president of Rock the Vote, CMO of Live Nation, and the founder of CAA Marketing. Currently, he's the managing director of the Forbes CMO network. He is widely followed and also wrote a book called The Scratch and Sniff Book of Weed. Now, Seth recently stated, "New Year, same old." What was it you said? You said, Seth?
I said, Mike, for your listeners who didn't see it, I said, "New Year, same old fuckery surrounding the narrative, surrounding the CMO narrative."
Yes. So this is going to be a great show. I'm really excited to have Seth on it because you can tell he has a really good a really strong point of view. And I've known him, gosh, it's over 10 years. So we're gonna have a no holds barred discussion.
I don't want to age you, but it's getting very close to 20 years.
Beth, you're killing me, man. All right, we're moving on right now. Let's start by talking about this post, New Year, same old fuckery. Tell us what you're thinking about and what drove you to make that statement.
Well, it's not a conversation that I don't have on the regular, which is to say that it is. But I was provoked by an article in Fortune that said that the headline was something to the effect of Fortune 500 companies eliminating the CMO post. The article then went on to highlight two companies amongst 500 that had recently eliminated the post. And then actually it highlighted three, and then a few paragraphs later, it said, "Oh, this one brought it back a year later."
Yeah, that was McDonald's. It was I think it was
exactly.
UPS and Etsy, and then McDonald's had dumped it.
And UPS, exactly. And it just like the previous narrative, the debunked narrative about CMO tenure, which lacked data, statistical relevance, any scrutiny, any context about why CMOs were leaving jobs, but left you with the perception that CMOs were getting fired over and over and over again, which has since been corrected by the search firms that were putting it out. It's just this industry, this community seems to have this kind of self-flagellating desire to self-flagellate, and just it's so self-defeating. And it's not just self-defeating for the CMOs and their marketing organizations. It's self-defeating for the organizations who do and should be relying on the chief marketing officer and her organization to be a principal architect of enterprise growth and strategy. And when we continue to perpetuate that this is a no-win job, now, by the way, there is some truth to the difficulties of the job, which I think we'll get into.
We're going to talk about that shortly, yes.
We serve nobody well except whoever wrote a piece that's looking for, a couple of page views and or search firms who are looking to, traditional search firms in particular, who are just looking to fill square pegs with square holes.
This is a great opening. And we are going to have Richard Sanderson on the show again to talk about it's the best of times, it's the worst of times for marketing.
Well, Richard did correct the record a year later, right?
He did.
And they added context, and they added the why we were seeing this movement.
They also stopped just looking at the top 100 or top couple.
Yeah,
hundred.
That's not representative of anything except themselves.
Exactly. And I was at a Marketing 50 summit where they came out with that, and the first time that said the average tenure is 2 years. And we were all like, wow. Anyways, with that as background, you have publicly said, in your mind, the CMO position is the toughest in business. Tell us why you think that.
Well, I think it absolutely is. And I'll give you a few reasons, and they kind of, it's a little bit of a Venn diagram. But I think before answering it, it's also important to recognize there are multiple types of CMOs. And so across those types, some broad generalizations, there are, as I say, a handful of reasons. But amongst them is the fact that most CEOs do not who are typically the hiring, the person making the final call, do not understand that there are multiple types of CMOs. And so they are, again, square peg, square hole, when that may not be the right fit. So let me give you a few thoughts. Today's CMO has the daunting task of being asked to plan for the unknown and react to the unimaginable in real time. It is trite, but nonetheless true to say there has been such a massive explosion, a sheer volume of change in the how and the where we reach people, but also just in the socio-cultural economic context that influences how the people we are marketing to, I don't care if you B2B, B2C, D2C, or any combination thereof, you're still marketing to people. You're still selling to people. What they think about, where their attentions are, what their moods are, what their concerns, fears, anxieties are. It's been an absolute assault on people's attentions that makes it harder to influence their intentions. It's harder than ever to separate signal from noise because there's been an explosion of data, but not an explosion of relevance, not an explosion of insight. I'd also argue that from a role perspective, we've seen a massive fragmentation and disaggregation, oftentimes disintermediation of the job. You've got, in the same enterprise as a CMO, a CBO, a chief growth officer, a chief sales officer, a chief commercial officer.
Oh, and so sometimes you move all the digital stuff away from the CMO.
Exactly.
It's its own channel. And so you're not really, like I always wanted the marketer to have all the consumer stuff. I didn't even consider it CMO. I consider it, I want to be the interface with the marketplace and the customer, but that's not the case. But then you have all this data and the function is moved in large part to your point about relevance to optimize the data. Is that true? What do you see?
Well, I
trying to disrupt your train of thought on the hardest job.
No, look, I think the question's a good one. And I think that the role has always been the optimization of data, right? But I don't think we're doing a particularly good job of it. And I think part of that is because the CEOs and CFOs to whom CMOs often report they're desperately seeking certainty. They're desperately seeking predictability. When I say desperate, it's no pejorative. Like
look, I've been there. Yeah.
Who doesn't want certainty and predictability? And while these positions are expert in the black and white of numbers, they're not typically expert in the 50 shades of gray that color why people buy. Human beings are a fairly idiosyncratic bunch. You heard it here first. And so you then look at the fact that so few of these C-suite colleagues come from marketing. I think it's something like 10% of the Fortune 250, even less as you go further, CEOs have any marketing background whatsoever. Fewer still are CFOs who are coming from marketing-centric background companies, and they don't have marketing backgrounds. So you're forced to shape the expectations and understanding of people who do not understand what you do, why you do it, what the payout should be, whether there should be an expectation of immediacy. And that influences their investment decisions. Something like 60, 70% of CMOs don't think they are given the appropriate investment resources to realize their strategies, the strategies that are agreed to. And you got CEOs and CFOs who are measuring long-term strategies on short-term results, which then takes me to where we as a community, because we are not without culpability in the difficulty.
I agree. That's why I was going to go here next, which is you get people that come in and they fire the agency right away. And what that basically tells the company is, I'm going to solve your problem with creative, when that may not be the problem at all.
That may not be the problem at all. And by the way, it takes a good client to make a great agency. You don't even have to be a great client, but you got to be a good client. So where is culpability, responsibility, accountability? And we have allowed brand and performance to be bifurcated as if they're two entirely separate things, as if they're binary. We have allowed ourselves to use attribution metrics that we know more often than not are bullshit because they don't
like last click as everything. Yeah,
exactly. The last click was influenced by who knows what. Oftentimes, right? The collapse of the funnel is real. We were talking about my shirt, right? What I'm wearing, which is never heard of the brand before, saw the shirt, saw the product in my Insta feed, bought it. Awareness led to purchase in a moment. But fashion kind of lives, or if I can call this fashion,
I'm going to go with
lives
that.
outside itself. We're not measuring what matters. And in a world of change, to stop my rant, we're kind of losing sight of what endures. And we're not focused on the fact that while so much has changed, the architecture of people's brains hasn't. We're still primed to survive and thrive. We still want to belong, understand, connect, share values. We make emotional decisions and then rationalize them intellectually, right? And we've lost sight of a lot of these things.
Well, I want to drill down on this a little more also. Very few boards have marketers on them as well. So the marketer is basically each time, wherever they go, if it's not a consumer goods company in particular, convincing everybody about the long and the short term when they're usually under enormous short-term pressure. You've equated the marketer a lot to an entrepreneur. Tell us more about that, because part of this discussion is leading me to think, all right, your view might be when you come in, you're actually the entrepreneur, growth entrepreneur in the company, if the company will let you, and if you are good enough to entrepreneurialize the work.
So I think it's less that. Actually, do you mind? There's one thing I didn't say that I think is super
important. Please.
Back to the last question. Marketing has become so decentralized, which is to say, right? There was a time in our careers past, Mike, when the CMO was the controlled, ivory tower controlled the brand, the message, the reputation, the image, the impact. That doesn't exist anymore. Anyone controls with their iPhone, with a keyboard, can control the destiny of a brand for good or ill in a moment. They can change the destiny of a brand in a moment. What the CEO says or doesn't do, where they spend lobbying dollars, what the customer service representative does or doesn't do. And yet the CMO still maintains accountability for so many things they don't control. But back to your more recent question, it's not so much that I equate the CMO with an entrepreneur per se, but that I think that entrepreneurial CMOs have a greater opportunity to succeed in today's world, by which I mean that unless and until we embrace the absence of certainty, unless and until we embrace and learn from smart failures, we will not grow. Right? Because there is no certainty in marketing today. By the way, there never has been.
There never has been, sadly, yes.
Yeah, there never has been. And so we have to cultivate and create a permission to fail, because if we learn from the failure, we can optimize the next thing. We can invest better moving forward. We can dial things up. We can dial things down. But unless we take an entrepreneur's or entrepreneurial kind of attitude towards learning and pivoting and growing and optimizing, I think we're screwed.
So a couple of questions I'm going to lay them all out and then you could take them. One is, all right, I agree with everything you just said, is you have to create a vision of how the consumer and the marketplace are going to go, and you have to make this work. But one, are marketers being trained to do this anymore? Two, do very many CEOs and boards actually buy into that theory, or do you have to sell the concept as well? And then three, an awful lot of companies put the marketer, I'm just going to say this, at the little kids table for the holiday, but then they're still responsible kind of for the outcome. And then we can also talk about why marketers actually sometimes put themselves at the little kids table on their own. Just talk about how do you see that? And then if you are looking at that as a CMO or a wannabe CMO, how do you play through it? That's like two questions all in one.
Yeah, no, but they kind of connect and roll up. So, I gave some remarks at last year's Forbes CMO Summit that were titled "Marketing Needs Much Better Marketing," and I was speaking about internal marketing and external marketing. The quality of our work as a global community, it's not good, right? Like, a lot of data to prove it's not good. But we're also doing a particularly poor job internally. Now, if I hold every marketer, we should hold each of us to a measure of accountability, which is say, what is the job? The job is to drive growth, period, the end. Sustainable, profitable growth. It may not happen today, but it better happen tomorrow or next week or on some plan. You asked if, and I don't think, actually, let me say it differently. Too few CMOs seem to understand that. And
I agree with
too
this.
few within those who understand, which blows my mind. And too few amongst those even who understand it seem to act as if you need to come to the table as a business executive first, who has an expertise in marketing, not a marketing expert. I was speaking to a CMO who told me that she went to her CFO and said, "I think we need to spend less in marketing next year." I freaking love that. We've used the uncertainty, the economic climate over the last couple of years and fears of recession to say, I got to figure out how to do more with less. No, you should have always been thinking about how to do more with less.
Right. Your job isn't to get the most money. Your job is to make the company win the most.
Exactly. And I think that is then what feeds into the fact that too few CMOs have seats at the board table, that too many have seats at the little kids table. And when I say too many, there are plenty that deserve to be at the little kids table.
I agree with that. Or they're optimizing performance marketing.
Correct.
Perfect.
Well, I'm not a fan of performance marketing. I'm a fan of performance, right? Which is actually, let me say that differently. Like, all marketing is performance marketing. All marketing is designed to perform. And if it isn't, you're just burning money. And so we have to take responsibility. It goes back to your first question about, the fuckery surrounding the CMO narrative. We are letting others drive the narrative. We are letting others define the role. If you're a marketer worth your salt, you should be defining the role. And if you're a marketer worth your salt, and there are many, you'll have your seat at the table.
So give us some tips. Give our listeners some tips on how they should do that, particularly if they find themselves either interviewing for a job where they can see it's a little kid's table, like how should they manage that interview? Or if they look around and they say, I am at the little kid's table.
Well, first of all, physician, heal thyself. So make sure you're doing the job of driving growth and or learning from why growth didn't happen with $1. And that's the thing. Like, we've become so, we're measuring everything except oftentimes the things that matter most are the things we can't measure, right? Like, how do you measure loyalty beyond the transaction, emotional loyalty? We were talking before we started recording about great work that gives people the feels. I want to feel something about almost every product I buy. I do want to feel something about every single brand I buy. And sometimes we buy for product, right? Pure efficacy, but sometimes, most of the time, I think we're buying for brand. I think if the fundamental question any CMO or CMO candidate has to ask as they're looking at a new opportunity is, can I succeed here? Right? Can I succeed? And that ensures that you've got alignment with your CEO and CFO on role, responsibility, authority, accountability, and influence. What is the culture of marketing investment? What is the attitudes towards marketing? Is it an investment or is it an expense? What's the corporate culture towards creativity, risk tolerance? And I'm talking about the biggest companies in the world and a startup.
No, I agree with this. If you can't, you have to interview not for the job, but also for are they going to let you actually drive growth or just demand it? And
by the way, I like the way you said it. Are they going to let you do it or just demand it? And when there is, when there isn't clarity about responsibility and authority, who can succeed? And I say that as somebody who has been in that position, who had a job, and I came to do one thing and they didn't let me. Would I have succeeded? I don't know. But I knew I couldn't do the job they hired me to do. I was a terrible interviewee because all I wanted them to do was buy me. I forgot that I needed to buy them.
Yeah, I think that's really important. So, hey, let's bounce around a little bit because There is. I think there's a lot of great advice for marketers in all the stuff you've just said. But a lot of times marketers are out there and they run into what I'll just call believers or non-believers. There's all these non-believers maybe on your board, maybe your CEO, CFO are non-believers in marketing in general, and they're going to run this like they might run a supply chain efficiency story or real estate. How do you manage that as a marketer or an agency when you are faced with non-believers who start with the idea that you should zero-based marketing?
You know, I get asked this question a lot, and I don't know if my answer is a good one, but my observation is that these same people are who are saying that, who are non-believers, to use your language, excuse me, they're denying their own lived experience, right? They're denying their own attitudes and behaviors. And so, you know, the CEO, the CFO, the watch they're wearing, the clothes they're wearing, the neighborhoods they live in, the vacations they choose, the cars they drive, the things in the country.
I totally agree with this. One of my things is, so you think consumers are so efficient, so I'm sure you're driving a Honda Civic because that would be the most efficient car. And I'm sure you're drinking like
generic soda,
average beer, average, you know, you're drinking stuff that is by far the highest value stuff. You're not driving a Mercedes to work or doing this stuff.
Exactly. They're denying their own lived experience. I'm holding my phone, by the way, not because I'm looking at my text from my daughter, but because Warren Buffett said something some years ago, or at least he gets credit for saying it. He said, if I gave you, you know, to an Apple user, if I gave you $10,000 to never buy or use an Apple product again, would you take it? I'm like, hell no, I would not take it. Right? That's a pretty powerful brand. That's LTV. That is lived experience, and they're denying it.
I agree with this. I think that's good advice. Still, the non-believers are interesting. One of the things we've had a guest or two on the show that have talked about things like Cannes and said that is where marketers are actually not doing themselves any favors by running around giving themselves awards. In fact, one of our guests called it a bit sad. Tell us what you think about that. Does that make marketers look self-absorbed or what?
Probably. I mean, you know, it is, again, if we think about the brand of Cannes, you know, it's palm trees in the Mediterranean and feels and often can be a boondoggle of sorts. You know, I've opined, I've only been, this year will be my fourth, so I've only been 3 times previously, but my first observation, I went in 2019 for the first time, was, boy, for a festival of creativity, there isn't a lot of creativity on the Croisette or anywhere else outside of the Palais. And to me, it's a bit of a metaphor for marketing broadly, where it's not that it's creativity gone awry, it's creativity gone away more often than not. And it's,
I have never made it there. I've never made it. So
right, like it's just, you've never been.
Oh, I never thought it was. Yeah, look, I would love to go, but I never thought it was worth the time. So,
but I think that then, you know, look, there's the festival, and to the credit of the Lions, if you look at the expansion of the categories that they recognize and honor over time, and it's expanded massively, they're also reflecting, both as mirror and as leader, the things that are increasingly important to this increasingly decentralized and expanded remit of the chief marketer and of the agencies that serve her. But I think, you know, look, there are a few moments within our global community where people come together in one place. And I think you go for the serendipity, you go for the meetings, you go to be part of a community. And I've never met in my life a more generous, kind, giving community of marketers than the CMO community in particular.
I agree with that.
And what I will also say is, you know, I was privileged to be able to give some remarks last year to winners of the Future Lions, the ad schools that won the Future Lions Awards. And one of the things I said, and I do think this is a big problem for us, is the greatest reward, recognizing we're standing at an award show, isn't the award you win, but the work that works, regardless of whether it wins an award.
Exactly.
And I interviewed Susan Creedle for a series that we do here at Forbes. The legendary creative, who's now chief creative officer at FCB, and she said something to the effect of, what drives a young creative's career growth isn't always the same as what drives a brand and business's growth. And we as a global community need to do a better job of bringing those things together. Because I don't care if you win an award, I care if you drove my business.
Yeah, your shareholders can't eat an award and, it doesn't drive the stock up. Speaking of networks, tell us about the Forbes CMO network and what you want to accomplish there.
So, the network is might otherwise be called community. And when I came in, Mike, my background, you spoke to some of it. I've spent most of the last 25 years either in or certainly around Hollywood. And so I look at our role at Forbes and within the CMO network specifically as being as metaphor, being an agent for marketers and marketing. Our job is to help the CMO and everybody in her ecosystem that surrounds her internally and externally do better marketing. That's our job, because there's misunderstanding, misalignment, and it's harder than ever to do good marketing, right? It's always been hard, but it's harder than it's
I agree with that. That's why we started CMO Confidential. Same thing, which is I think marketers are not getting trained as well, and it's a harder job. And also,
marketers used to be trained by marketers. Now they're being trained by engineers. A broad stroke generalization, but it is to represent them, which is why within kind of our editorial focus, we're not particularly interested in quote unquote news stories. Forbes is very interested. Within the CMO network, we're less, because we're interested in stories that don't have a perishable life of 48 hours, right? That are as relevant a year from now as they are the day they're written, and that make somebody, even in complete disagreement, and people disagree with what I write and publish and post all the time, even in disagreement, we can get stronger. That's actually, we get stronger.
I agree with that. So there should be a lot of evergreen stories in marketing, and also telling people how to do CAC better is not going to make for great growth. Hey, I would be super negligent if I didn't ask about lessons learned at CAA and also about the Scratch and Sniff book.
Two things that are unrelated.
Totally unrelated, but super interesting.
So, I started CAA marketing in May of 2000. And I'd never been, you mentioned I was president of Rock the Vote, but I'd never worked inside a Hollywood company before. Rock the Vote was a nonprofit. I learned a lot. I mean, in fact, everything I just said about the role of the Forbes CMO network comes from having been surrounded by and working closely with, also at Endeavor, some of the best agents in the world. And watching the best agents in the world do what they do, I learned that representation is like a hyper focus. Representation is oftentimes telling your client what they don't, good representation, what they don't want to hear, pushing them to do what they don't want to do, because you believe as their representative that it is best for them. It requires conviction. I learned that taste matters so much. I remember asking our general counsel at CAA, I'd been there a month or two, why a particular lit agent who's still there was so good and so well regarded. And he looks at me and he's like, she's got great taste. And taste matters. But I think that if I would leave you with three things. High tolerance for ambiguity. I did the deal while I reported to the then board. I did the deal with our general counsel, an absolute legend named Michael Rubel. I was like, okay, we're done. What's it going to take to succeed here? Which, by the way, I probably should have asked before we were done. But I'll never forget what he said. He said, those who succeed here have a high tolerance for ambiguity. High tolerance for ambiguity. That's what everybody needs today, marketers in particular. And I've never hired anyone since who doesn't have a high tolerance for ambiguity, regardless of what I'm hiring them for. is a brilliant, he's now one of the few folks who really runs the agency. Kevin Huvane, one of the greatest agents in Hollywood's history, a brilliant executive. He said to me shortly before I left, we were closing a deal, and it was getting a little squishy. He's like, there's a point where somebody has to step up and close the deal. And it's always important, deal both literally and metaphorically. It's always important to keep that in mind. And then, the last thing is service is everything. And I don't care, what you're selling, client side, service side, again, B2B, D2C, you're in the service business. We're all in the quality of life business. We're all in the business. Motor Oil is in the business of making my life easier. We're all in the business of adding to somebody's quality of life, and CA taught me that.
Nice. But we're running out of time, so I'm gonna ask you to come back on the show later this year, and then we'll talk about the book. But so but
you can buy it now on Amazon, the Scratch and Sniff Book of Weed.
All right. Funniest story you can tell on the air, and or practical advice to our audience that we haven't talked about yet. You can take both or one, but you have to pick at least one.
Yeah, you were kind enough to give me a heads up on this question, and I was thinking about the funny stories, and I realized they're probably only funny to me. So I'm going to tell a story that I think will be familiar to far too many of your listeners, and I'll position it as advice. And let me start with the punchline: you're not the target. And too often, going back to so much of what we've talked about, the people who evaluate marketing evaluate it as if they were the target when it was never built for them to begin with. So this is quite a few years ago, and we were at CAA. I think I was probably working with you when you were at eBay at the time, but we had another client. We happened to be in Hong Kong at this moment. It was shortly after 9/11. We were doing a meeting with I was agency side, client side, was the global CMO of a company, a massive consumer brand. We were going around the world meeting with their marketing leadership. He leaves this one meeting, comes back in about 10 minutes later, and you could just tell whatever he left for didn't go well. So I said to him, what happened? And he said he'd just gotten off the phone with a member of his board who was a octogenarian at the time, who insisted that they take a commercial off the air because the commercial starred a very famous musician at the time, and still, because her belly button was showing. This is a youth-focused brand, and the octogenarian is like, I don't want to see her belly button. He wasn't the target. And so millions and millions of dollars in creative and agency time and client time and media just tanked, right? We all know the story of the idea that got killed because the CEO's 12-year-old didn't like it, didn't get it, you're not the target. I was sitting with a CMO recently, and I was like, I know I'm not the target of your creative, but I don't get it. Tell me what the brief is. Shared the brief. I still didn't quite get it, but then shared the metrics. I was so not the target because the metrics are insanely positive. What they measured mattered, and what they saw was spectacular. And it's a good lesson. We're not the target.
I think that is a great way to end the show. So, Seth, thank you for being
Thanks for having me, man.
You're more than welcome. We'll have you back towards the end of the year to talk about all the stuff that's going to go on in 24. Thanks, everyone, for listening to CMO Confidential. Look for more of our shows on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube, which include an operations-trained CEO dishes on what he really thinks about marketing. A B-School professor discusses brands taking a socio-political stand. Hint, it's probably not a great idea. And what your agency wants to tell you, but won't. Parts 1, 2, 3, and 4. And also, if you like the show, please subscribe. And the upcoming show, Marketing, the battle between believers and non-believers. Hey, all you marketers, stay safe out there. This is Mike Linton signing off for CMO Confidential.